Hi, it's Anna-Thea, your Divine Feminine Educator, and I'm here with Libbee. I'm so excited to have you here, and we are going to do an interview about the empowered empath and what you need to know. And you're seeing two empaths right here in front of your face. So welcome, Libbee. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you. Yes, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I want to tell our listeners a little bit about who you are so that they know who is this amazing woman sitting over there. Libbee is an intuitive healer and teacher. And she also does sound healing. And I got to know Libbee through one evening when I went over to my sister's house, and Libbee, this tiny little, beautiful, amazing woman, comes with all of her crystal bowls. And she puts them all around her, and we laid on the carpet with our crown chakras towards you, and we just closed our eyes, and she just played her bowls, and we just went to bliss heaven. My actual stepmother, who's in her late 80s, she said she actually had an out-of-body experience. So, you know, it's just really beautiful for all ages, all different belief systems. It's just sound is healing.
Totally, yes.
Yeah.
My favorite part about it is that you get to just show up and relax, you know. So many parts of our healing journey is a lot of work and a lot of attention and focus, and it's nice to just have a modality where there's more effortlessness to it, and you get to just be who you are, just show up as you are, and you always receive exactly what you need.
That's why it's so much fun to do. It's just like you just get to let go.
Yeah.
And that's where the magic happens, really. So what we really want to talk about today is the empowered empath and what you really need to know. So Libbee, I'm just going to kind of ask you some questions. We're just going to have some open dialogue and conversation, and we're going to talk about what Libbee wants to share regarding, the positive aspects of being an empath, and that you actually have been given a superpower. So I hope that's what you get from this journey here with us today. So I guess the first part is what I want to ask you, Libbee, is how being an empath, but for us to understand how we are creator beings.
Yeah.
I know you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, so, part of the acknowledgement when we start to look at our energy and how our body works in the world, we're like little sponges, and we're constantly absorbing information and data and energy. And really what's interesting about that is even if you have no awareness that that's what you're doing all the time, there's still a part of you that's co-creating with the energy around you. So the moment you bring that into a conscious awareness, there's way more accessibility and playful energy that you get to actually decide as the embodied spirit in the flesh. And so many people will go most of their life without any real idea that they're actually a creator being. That's really what we are. And so people go, well, what does that mean? It's because you're constantly creating with this data that you're emanating out into the world. So your body is an antenna. It has an average frequency. If you were to measure it with a device, you would actually see that there's wavelengths that come off of your physical body. And so as you begin to heal yourself, as you begin to really discover who you are, have maybe daily meditations in some form, that starts to change that vibrational data that you're emanating out into the world. Same thing is when you're having a spike in an emotion, and that's on the full spectrum of emotions. So you're looking at, maybe it's an anger that you're feeling, maybe it's grief, maybe it's excitement, maybe it's being playful. So on both ends of the spectrum, that's going to dictate how your antenna is communicating with the world around you. So the awareness that we're constantly creating with who we are and how we're feeling and how we're thinking and how we're existing in the body, that has a lot to do with what you're able to go ahead and manifest and create into your reality. So we're looking at creation as far as physical things, but we're also looking at creating a new energy for yourself and what you want to be feeling all of the time. So the creation is not limited by anything other than your own belief system. So really getting clear about the fact that you are a creator being and you're creating this all the time. You're creating your reality, whether you know or not. The more you can show up in the driver's seat of that and start to play with it and work with the energy, the more empowered you actually become.
I love it. You know what comes to mind, because a teacher told me this once, and it's in regards to sexual energy. You can ultimately, people don't really understand that our sexual energy is that energy which actually animates us. It's not just energy in our crotch. But that's another subject. But but this idea of you have a lot of horsepower. So you might have 12 horses, wild horses, and they're just running all over the place. Being a conscious creator is taking those 12 horses and actually having them all work together, and you're in charge of the reins, and you know where you're directing that energy. And that was such a big visual for me. You know?
Totally. Yeah, I love that visual. That's exactly what it is. It's really just putting yourself in alignment with the trajectory that you're wanting to put more energy into, rather than just kind of going forward blindly, not quite sure what your body's communicating or manifesting. And, you know, this is really common. People ask me a lot, why am I stuck in this pattern? Why do these, you know, same kind of circumstances keep showing up in different bodies, you know, or different phases of my life? And often it's because there's an unconscious part of you that's creating that experience over and over and over, just to sort of wake you up to the fact that you're creating that. So the more you can show up with a level of playfulness to your own creations and take accountability for them, you start to actually see your power behind it and how you can make different choices going forward.
I love what you just said. Can you, I know not the exact words, but it's like you keep on having that until you can wake up and say, oh, I'm the one that's making that happen. And a lot of people like to just stay in that victim.
Yes.
It's happening to me.
Yes. And you don't have to negate the fact that it's less than desirable. Like, you get to show up with your feelings around it and be fully transparent. But also, once you go through that first layer of the kind of shock and disappointment and frustration and maybe anger, you start to come into more of a neutrality space. And then that's when it's appropriate to really look at your perspective. Why would you have said yes to this pattern playing over and over and over again? What is it teaching you? What unconscious part of you thinks that that's what you deserve?
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it's, you know, I think a big thing that we as a collective consciousness are still learning is that to take responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And you get to look at both sides. You can still see the victimization aspect of how maybe you were attacked, or maybe you were in a toxic relationship and you suffered some abuse. I mean, you get to have that truth, but the more you're able to mold that story into a version that actually feels good in your body, that empowers you, the more you actually change your antenna of data that you're emanating out into the world, and you stop punishing yourself, because you actually free yourself from the lower vibrational, like, suffering that comes when you can only see the victimization aspect. When you see that piece and you see the higher aspect of, yeah, this really sucked, but it actually launched me into my own self-healing. It made me a better person. I suddenly realized I was capable beyond what I thought I was capable of. You know, you start to see a new sense of self in that structure of freeing yourself from that limitation. And so you go through the initiation into an empowered state of being. And now you've got both. You get to say, wow, look at how I can express the victimization aspect, but I can also express the empowered version of this. And ultimately, I want to be living my life on a day-to-day basis with more energy involved in the empowered side, because that actually allows fluidity to flow through my body. Whereas if we were to really look at the victimization energy, it feels very restricted and it's sticky, and it kind of creates this sort of mess of a web around your energy field, which ultimately creates more punishment for you and doesn't even get sent to the person that abused you. So you're really just hurting yourself through that experience.
Wow. And so you see that energy, like that meshed energy, you can't negate it. You have to love it and then see the other, how to take responsibility. Let me ask you this. Two things is, what is the most common cycle of that, where they're, you know, the sabotage or the victim in relationship, and also in regards to these times that we're in. So what's the most common lack of awareness that I am a creator, paradigm in that you see when you're working with your clients? What's the most common one that they get stuck with?
So the one that I see the most, and I suspect it has something to do with the fact that I am really a teacher for people that are aware on some degree that they're really sensitive. So their sensitivity levels are just kind of off the charts. Now, all of us are born with the ability to be sensitive, but some of us come into the body with those channels blown open. So it feels like it's sort of just happening to you, you know, and the intensity of what life can feel like when you've got all those energy sensors blown open is a general sense of overwhelm. So it's really hard for people to see beyond the experience of being overwhelmed, and they can't see how this is actually an opportunity for them to leverage out of the overwhelm energy and into an empowered state where you start to recognize that some of those gifts that you have and that ability can just be turned in a different way, and now it's really serving you. It's not there to make you uncomfortable indefinitely. It's there to make you uncomfortable enough so that way you wake up and go, okay, I have to start making different choices, or I need to actually pay attention to this and prioritize it. So it's like your body's trying to give you that insight, and because we live in a society that doesn't really honor what to do with that sensitivity, there's this idea that something's wrong with you. And so a lot of people that cross paths with me are stuck in a pattern of thinking that something is wrong with them because they keep experiencing these sort of devastating relationships or disappointing environments that really trigger them and put them into a state of fear in just being themselves. So they start to really retract their power back into a really low space of not feeling worthy for being here. And then there's escapism. There's a lot of addictions that come with that. There's a lot of what I see is diseases, you know, physical diseases will start to manifest in the body. A lot of times that looks like autoimmune conditions, where your body's essentially attacking itself. So the symbolism is there for you to really visit. And that is honestly how a lot of my journey began, was when I got diagnosed with lupus, was really when I finally went, okay, my body needs me to show up and recognize that energy is a very real thing, and it's affecting me so greatly that it's making me physically ill. So sometimes we say yes to creating that dynamic for ourselves just to initiate ourselves into a higher level of awareness about our own power.
Oh my Lord. Well, you know, the way I've dealt with it is just to be very careful with who I'm with and making sure that I have enough time to myself.
Yeah.
To replenish.
Yeah. And so when you resonate with being a sensitive person, even if you're not quite aware of the term empath, which is really just a fancy word for saying that you feel everything all the time, you're using your feeler sensors to feel what other people are feeling. You can tap into, you know, an imprint of an energy in a certain space that was there, could have been hundreds of years ago, could have been yesterday, but your body is constantly picking up all this stuff in addition to your own information. But when you're clogged full of all that stuff, there's no discernment. There's no ability for you to really feel into what's yours and then know what's other people's. So you're just kind of a mess, and it just feels chaotic because you're like, I can't trust myself to even feel into my gut because my gut's holding on to so much other stuff for other people. So it really is this issue of being sponge-like and being unable to really see what's yours and what's the other person. So like you described, being alone is a perfect way for your body to start to detach from everybody else's stuff and create some flow. And now you can really feel into, oh yes, this is my energy right here. And you create a new frame of reference. So once you get established with that frame of reference of this is what I feel like, this is what my truth feels like in my body when I found it, then going forward, you can start to say, oh, yep, I'm feeling something and that is not me.
And it's very subtle.
Yes.
The minute you get in that energy, you can immediately just go right down, you know,
Yeah.
Down the
So,
rabbit hole, and you're like in the sea of other people's energy, and oh, that's me too, or not. I'm not, you know.
yeah. Yeah. And so a lot of what I end up teaching people is how to not be afraid of feeling other people's stuff, because it's going to happen. And so we just have to take the fear lid off, so that way you go into your toolbox of what you can do when it happens. So you're not constantly in anticipation and trying to like limit your reality because you're afraid to feel something.
So how do you feel that you have refined that skill? Of who you are and who the other is. It's in your astrology too. I love listening to you because I had already looked at your astrology. And
That's funny. Yeah. So it took a long time for me to really learn the art of discernment.
mm-hmm. What helped you to do it?
Honestly, the biggest help that I sought, which I didn't even correlate as, oh, this is going to be the solution for me to be able to discern my own energy. It just sort of became part of my routine. And it was only through that I went, oh, this is actually helping this. I started doing daily breathing meditations. So, there's many different forms of meditation, but the one I felt really called to sort of committing to on a daily basis was more of a purification type meditation. We're running that energy of your breath up and down the channels, and just kind of purifies the heck out of your chakra system.
Nice.
So it's like whatever was there, I don't need to analyze it and pick it apart and figure out where it came from. It's like in that zone, I don't care. Like I'm just like, I just want to find my baseline and really just anchor this. And so I wasn't sitting there doing what I do like professionally, where I look at the energy and sort of figure out where it came from. I was just like, yep, doesn't feel good, doesn't feel like it's mine, just blow it out, So what that did was it taught my body to not be attached, to not judge things, to just allow it to move. And so I had to like train myself. I became my own teacher in that sense, and went, yeah, you have all these modalities and all these abilities to read the energy and look at it and see it, but how much of you really needs to engage in that cerebral sort of attention? And I realized that I had quite literally become addicted to deciphering and picking it apart and figuring out where it came from. And all it was really doing was putting me into a funky state of fear and defense, where I was sort of like, the energies are coming at me, and it just didn't feel good, but I had to play with that in order to know the difference. So through all the training, it's like, here's how you protect yourself. But what I didn't realize was that even just having the belief of like, I need to put my bubble up when I'm in somewhere, I was resisting the information that was coming in. So then I started getting more of it.
So so when you try to do that protection thing.
Yes. Which is heavily taught in wellness and in healing communities. And I get why it's taught, because people want this sense of separation between themselves and others. And so for that, I totally understand. But really the answer is to build yourself up from the inside out. And that becomes a natural protection. So when you're very comfortable in your body and you're very present and you're aware, you're not affected by some energy that's coming at you and gets stuck here. You just laugh at it. You're like, oh, that got stuck there. And you pull it out and you let it go. It just becomes no big deal. And I think that's so important for people to know, because there's a panic that creeps up when you realize that, you either get hard on yourself because I let my guard down, or, I let that person do this to me. And then you're upset with that person. You're upset with yourself. It really just takes you 10 steps backwards instead of really empowering yourself. So I always encourage people to, do the breath work, really, really tune into the body in that way, because that will just purify the heck out of your system. And you're going to bring in your higher self information, which is there to teach you discernment. It's there to give you what your truth is. And so that's your sense of clarity. And then that becomes the foundation at which you start to naturally measure everything else too.
Well, and what I'm hearing you say too is that if you're an empath or you're sensitive and you're here to bring in a better world, the only way you're going to do that is to have a committed practice of doing laundry on a regular basis, doing energetic laundry, literally, like not, just put it like moving the energy.
Yes.
It's really just moving the energy because it's not yours, and you just keep bringing your higher self in.
Yes.
I mean, that's why yoga is so important to me. That's why the breath work is so important to me. That's why every morning when I get up in the morning, that I put my butt on the earth and my crown up towards the heavens, and I check in,
Yeah.
But so I guess what I'm really wanting to stress here, what you're saying, and I want to emphasize that for the listeners, is that if you are sensitive, if you're an empath, you've got to have a committed practice daily to move energy, is what you're really saying.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, and I think I'll sneak this piece in here because it feels like the acknowledgement of what an empath really is here to do and be is not really talked about very often. And so I think just putting a new perspective here for people to consider. So I cross paths with a lot of empaths, people that kind of have spent some time on Google trying to figure out why they're so sensitive and why they sort of just know things, and all their rabbit hole chases end up leading them to wanting to know more. How can I work with this? So that's usually when they walk in my door. And it's so interesting to look at them as a soul, because when I take a step back and look beyond their personality and really look at who they actually are on a soul level, it's very clear that there's like this archetypal energy behind the choice to become an empath. So when you're choosing a body and you're saying, this is the type of incarnation experience I need for my own soul growth, you're not going to wimp out and make it easy on yourself. You're an old soul that's had a lot of experiences. So it has a lot to do with the exact timing you choose to incarnate and what you want to do in service to yourself and to the world simultaneously, where it's a 50-50 exchange. And when you make those choices, those of us who have chosen to become empaths are really setting a new standard for what every being that's going to be incarnating here in the future will be experiencing. So it's like the first wave of people with extreme sensitivity to figure out how to manage that at a time when there's not a lot of support to do so. So it's like the ultimate challenge.
The ultimate challenge.
The ultimate challenge. And yet you have everything you need to succeed at that. And then you can hold space for other people as they awaken to that development occurring within them. And then as the new souls start to incarnate here, they're going to have very obvious signs, which the children already do, of extrasensory abilities, and their sensitivity is just off the charts, and you can't fit them into a box anymore because you're not meant to. And so a lot of the progression of our own ascension as soul beings is looking at wanting to heighten our sensitivity, wanting to have these intuitive abilities as, this is a natural law. This is something that we are all born with. And so to create a community going forward that really supports that, it's like those of us who resonate with the empath right now are the leaders of that evolution. We're here to teach the others through our experience on how to survive and then how to thrive based on that.
Oh my God. And we are in the birthing canal of it, because when you're talking about that, what's really coming up for me is, it's like diamonds under pressure, because guess what? The question is, what does narcissism have to do with all of this? Right? There's plenty of narcissists out there. So if you can talk a little bit about narcissism, our leaders being narcissists, relationships where there's this narcissistic pattern and the other person is suffering greatly. I don't know, have you ever done any healing work on a narcissist? Or does narcissism exist? Or what do you see energetically that's happening? Why did they cut? What's their purpose,
Well, yes, I've had very deeply personal experiences with narcissists, because all empaths do. That's part of the path. Part of the path is to sort of trick yourself into seeing people for who they're capable of being and not necessarily who they're choosing to be in this lifetime. And a lot of those energies equate to the narcissistic profile. So if you look at the opposite of an empath, it's a narcissist. They're opposites. And here's why. The narcissist has had so much trauma that they've taught themselves not to actually empathize or feel for other people anymore. They've cut themselves off from that ability, and it's sort of a choice that they're making on a higher level to be a trigger in the world with that kind of personality type. Well, what does that do for the empath? It makes the empath have to really be on their own in the growth. They have no support from the narcissist. They have to take continual toxic abuse from the narcissist. They're not getting any validation for being sensitive. If anything, you tend to be gaslighted by the narcissist to make you feel like you're crazy, you know? So communication is one of the biggest issues when it comes to narcissism, because they tend to be people that will reflect back to you that it's your fault and that it has nothing to do with them. And so there's zero accountability on their part. And so they're the ultimate challenge to say yes to, either in a parent form, a friendship form, romantically is probably one of the most intense experiences you can have, because you'll learn, you know, if you're looking at the perspective of the empath, you'll learn that despite all of the chaos that the narcissist creates for you, you're going to love them anyways. And that's perhaps the most profound, mind-blowing experience to be in is, oh my God, despite all this suffering that you've caused me, and despite all this pain that I felt, which, you know, ultimately puts me through the canal of empowering the heck out of myself and freeing myself, and that journey of what it takes to do that is not easy. But that is really what tunes you back into your higher self alignment. And then you have that awareness that now you get to say no when a narcissist crosses your path. You have the red flag, you can see it beyond what it's presenting itself, because narcissists tend to be very charismatic. In fact, in my personal experience, I dated a narcissist for 6 years. 6 years. And it's crazy to think about it. It's like, why would I have chosen to stay in that for 6 years? But there was so many different layers to work through. And one of them that was the most fascinating to me is that because I was the sensitive person in the relationship, and I was able to see as much of his perspective as I possibly could, and also my own, it was fascinating to watch how everyone else in our world, including friends or family, couldn't really see beyond the charisma of the personality.
Sounds like a duplicate of my experience. Oh yeah. My God.
So there was a constant denial in my world that, you know, the flashlight was pointed back on me for being crazy because I was making a big deal out of nothing or whatever it was. And so there wasn't a single person that was like, you know what? Yes, this is manipulation. Yes, you are getting gaslighted, you know, all the things, right? So I had to really journey through that experience feeling very alone. And I think there's something really beautiful about that fragmentation that happens. It just cracks you open. And it's like you get really vulnerable and really raw. And it's like you kind of hit rock bottom, because in a lot of ways, you're recognizing that you're both the student and the teacher in that realm. So you have to teach yourself how to get out of that cycle, how to free yourself from that dynamic. And when you are left to do that on your own, it's like the ultimate challenge. So those were the moments in my life where I actually tapped more into my higher self power than I do in present time, because I needed that extra boost of energy to get myself to say yes to my own personal freedom and stop saying yes to trying to care for somebody that was never going to want to change or want to meet me halfway or want to understand where I was coming from. And so those are valid choices on the narcissist part, you know. So when we look at source energy, everything's very neutral. It's like there's equal acceptance and respect for people that choose to be perpetrators as they are victims. And I think that's mind-blowing for our human perspective to really sit with. But it's true that all experience is valid and all teachings are valid, but you have to wake up to the fact that you are creating that. So I was choosing this narcissist relationship as a catalyst for me to actually empower the heck out of my empath body, because I had to for my own survival.
Okay, so well, let's go into the next thing we want to talk about, which is really the importance of your state of being, because that's what really, so in a way, he was a blessing And I feel I've had very similar experiences, just really sharpening your empath skills and really your soul being directed more into that and really honoring yourself. You had to go inward and really honor yourself. So let's, what do you want to share as far as the importance of the state of your being, especially if you're an empath?
Yeah. So state of being, like, what does that even mean? So when we look at like the soup of who you are, it's really a combination of different factors. So we've got the physical body, we've got the emotional body, the mental body, the astral body. So you've got all these layers of who you are. And all of that combined, there's like an average that you could pull from that energy. And so from moment to moment, this is changing and it fluctuates up and down based on your emotional state or something you're thinking about or something you're trying to give yourself on a higher level. So there's so many variables that really complete who you are from moment to moment. But that is what I mean by the state of being. So that who you are radiating out like an antenna in the world, you are creating everything from that soup of energy. So the more you're aware of how to fine tune all those different layers of who you are, and at least give it more attention than you had before, because wherever you put your attention, you're flowing energy right to that. So being really mindful of where you're putting your attention every day. If you're thinking a lot about the past and you're not thinking about the present or the future, there's an imbalance and it'll cause a distortion in your state of being. Or if you are really stuck in a mental pattern where you keep thinking negative thoughts about yourself, or you're just revisiting all your, the lack energy. I feel like I don't have this and I'm not good enough for this. And my childhood was horrible and my partner, disrespects me, and you're just swimming in this sort of negative sea, then you can only create with that energy. And so it's very limited. Your ability to create these things that you're quite capable of receiving is like trying to squeeze it through a tiny tube, because generally what you're communicating is that you're in a state of overwhelm. So when there's a lot of things you're holding on to and you can't let it go, the body's like, okay, I'm radiating out to the world that I'm overwhelmed, so I simply can't take anything else. And what'll happen is you kind of close yourself off, and yet you're having these desires for manifestation, like, oh, I want this beautiful new house, or I want this new car, or I want this career, or I want to feel this way. And there's no room in your space to actually receive those things. So it's not that you can't have it, and it's not that you don't deserve it. It's that you aren't allowing yourself to actually receive, based on the fact that there's too much going on here already that needs the validation. It needs acknowledgement. It needs attention on it so it can move and start to create a flow. So the whole art of the state of being is just having accountability for all of those things. And some of it's learning to love yourself despite the struggle. So if you've got a lot of physical ailments going on, that's something you got to love yourself through. But know that when you're in a lot of excruciating pain, your ability to manifest your way out of it is really difficult. It's limited by just a smidgen of your body being in a lower vibrational experience. So you get to allow yourself to have that and go, well, if my physical body is suffering in these ways, then I can maybe work on my mental health. Maybe I can focus on the mental body and really think about, how can I take this experience I'm having and put a new story around it that actually feels good in my body, because now I've got a new thought pattern and a new story that I'm identifying with. And then I've got a new emotional layer to take in that actually releases the sadness or the frustration or any sort of perpetrating attack that I was holding on to with the old belief. So it's all about looking at how your state of being is created from all of these things adding up to who you really are. And a lot of it can be tweaked and adjusted by just allowing yourself to create a new belief or a new thought pattern or a new perspective.
People aren't doing that. They need to do that, because a lot of people are running around with fear right now. We don't know what the future holds, where the future is going. And it's the not knowing, I think, that's creating a lot of fear. People were normally relatively in control of their life. And now this is a global event that we're in. So what would you say is the biggest thing for people to overcome fear?
So a lot of it comes back to change. So I like to really associate, especially at the beginning of working with fear energy, you want to really look at the biggest fear that we have that's ingrained into who we are is the fear of change, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, because change is a constant. It's always happening. So how can we be in fear of something that's naturally occurring? But it's because a lot of times when we look at trauma, which is really just a fancy word for something that has given you some level of discomfort or something to grow through, or an experience that, you know, kind of molds you into a different vibrational state. So trauma can be something as simple as one time somebody said something really negative to you and you took it very personally, and now you've got this trauma. And if you never really worked through that healing, then you've carried it thus far into your life, and it compiles with all these matching vibrations in addition to that original wound. So no matter who you are or what body you're in, you have some trauma. We all do. And so trauma can be extreme. It can be, you know, really being affected by abuse or something more physical, but it can also just be words or the way you were treated or disrespected or not acknowledged. And so all those varying degrees of trauma actually limit how your body feels in relation to change. Because what the body tends to remember is more of what didn't work or what was painful. It doesn't always have the vivid memory right here of all the times that you succeeded and all the times that things went well. So even if you have an experience with change that's very positive, the body has an inclination to remind you of all the changes that happened that were sudden, that shocked the hell out of you, that caused another trauma. So like right now, as a perfect example with this pandemic situation, we all hit a level of collective trauma from being told we could no longer live our life the way that we were living it. The fear of, am I going to get sick? Am I going to make other people sick? I mean, the amount of fear of change is just like whoosh, right up to the surface. So how can we work on that without really making ourselves feel like we're constantly in a state of having to work towards something, which I think is not really very self-loving when we have that demand on our space that we do to ourselves sometimes, where it's like, I need to be perfect, I need to feel better, you know, and we get into this routine of looking at, you know, trying to force ourselves to work on something, and it just isn't the best way to approach the solution, because really what you're looking at is how can I come into this level of learning about myself with the least amount of resistance. So if you recognize that you have a fear of change, start with something that really doesn't hold a lot of depth of meaning. So like for me, when I first started doing this, I went, okay, so I have a subconscious fear of change. I'm going to drive to the grocery store today without my GPS, and I'm going to go a different route than I've ever gone before, so I can gently teach my body that change can actually lead me to the place that I wanted to go. And so I started doing these little things. The next day it was, oh, I've never eaten this food before. I'm going to play with this food today and teach my body today that trying new things is actually not that scary. So what you're really working with is the vibration of change, and you're giving it a healing because you're not super attached to the outcome. It's not like you're focused on a huge change that you're trying to make for yourself. You're focused on these little things that you're not super invested in or attached to, and that allows an even greater level of healing to occur, because you're really teaching the subconscious that yes, it might be true that sometimes change is going to occur in an abrupt way and it's going to be something that I don't really desire, but you're going to be more in flow and flexible with that change, and you're not going to be as reactive. So when people recognize that they're really struggling, especially in a sensitive body, kind of feeling everything that they're feeling, if they can even just show up just a little bit to playing with change and really initiating that change, so that way the body can feel like you're in a sense of control with it, then what'll happen is you'll shift out of the fear of change and you go more into a state of neutrality. So then when big change occurs, and it is kind of a scary one, you'll have this really bizarre experience where you're like, I feel like if this happened to me a year ago, I would have been besides myself, but I'm witnessing myself right now sort of not as affected by this change that I know I'm not really preferring, but I'm not emotionally like losing my shit over the fact that this is happening. And that's because you put the training wheels on for your body to acknowledge that change can actually be a really beautiful thing, and that it's actually part of your co-creation, showing up and meeting yourself in it and playing and molding the energy rather than being scared and like trying to prevent the change from happening that's going to happen anyways.
So what I'm hearing you say is that in your daily life, wherever you have routine, change it.
Yes.
So if you're using the same coffee mug every morning, stop it. Or if you're sitting in the same seat for breakfast every morning, sit in another seat or go somewhere else. Or so that's what you're saying, is be playful with that, all that kind of stuff. Okay.
Yeah, because it's the simplest and the most, to me, the most fun way to show up to retraining the body, to really disconnecting the old kind of programming that comes with change. So then what does that really do? It results in you not being afraid of the unknown.
I love this. This is so awesome. So I think this leads us right into the next thing that we really want to talk about, is acting on your desires, and then the 3 different components that you were telling us about. So I don't know which one you want to talk about first, passion, excitement, or play, because that's what you were talking about. But
yeah, play is my favorite. So when we look at wanting to co-create and the highest vibrational sort of emotions, and it's an action that's difficult to put into language, because when we think about desire, a lot of people have a hard time discerning what that is. They go, well, how do I know what I really desire? Because I might be feeling somebody else's desire for me. And that's actually a very common thing, especially when you're at a phase of your life where you're on the cusp of making some big decisions and you've run those decisions by a lot of people. Now you've got all of their opinions and it's very clouded and you can't really discern what your real desire actually is. And so if you break down the concept of desire and just looking at that energetically, what is it really? Well, what it is your body has an emotional response to the thing that you are meant to experience or to be doing or to be creating or to being. So when your body feels into that, what does it feel like? It feels like excitement. It feels like that overwhelming sensation of, the little tinglies that run through your body when the most exciting thing is happening. So for a lot of people, when they're at that basis of saying, I don't really know what I desire, I just know that I don't desire what's happening or what I'm experiencing right now, but I don't know what my alternative is. And that makes sense to me because we were taught when we were kids that our like fantasy and our ability to really use our imagination was something that was only in childhood. And we were taught that it was sort of a wasted ability. And it's like, oh, you have a creative imagination, like good for you. Don't use it past age 12. It's weird that we're not really given the truth about what our imagination is actually doing. And the truth is that allowing yourself to close your eyes and imagine things or visualize things is really activating your 6th chakra with the rest of your chakra system to actually create that into your reality. So the more you show up to it with that level of acknowledgement, the more the body gets in alignment and says, oh yes, this is how we're creating. So if you go into fantasy and you say, I'm going to sit here and just imagine and let my body conjure up all these wild things that might not feel super realistic, it doesn't matter. The body goes, oh, look, this is what we want. This feels exciting. So you can really meet yourself halfway through the visualizations and through just conjuring up, what does it feel like in this vision? Who are you? What are you wearing? What do you smell like? Like all the things, all the sensories, whatever you can activate from that visualization, in addition to engaging all the other senses. So that creates a trick for the body, because the body doesn't know the difference between your imagination and reality, because that's only a concept that we've sort of created with the mind.
So what if you're just in this record, you're not feeling good, you just, everything is reinforcing all the negative stuff in your world. How do you, what do you see as the best way to use your imagination? Because sometimes it's like, forget it, I don't want to think of anything good, I just.
Yeah. Well then, so when people are in that kind of state, everything's about comfort. So what is the most comfortable scenario you can give yourself? And, for me, like I tend to go with like a big comfortable chair in like the middle of the forest, you know, like something that's so nonsensical. Like you wouldn't take a big furry beanbag into the forest and lay there. But in fantasy, you can do whatever you want. So you find what literally feels most comfortable. Like if you had no limitation, what would comfort look like for you right now? And every time you tune into this, it might be a different visualization. It might be totally different. Maybe another time you're, you know, by the ocean, or you're in a room and it's just like these beautiful flowers everywhere. It might be different every single time because you're being really present with that particular vibration that needs to be healed. And so allowing yourself to really conjure up those visualizations of what would feel good, you know, maybe being hugged and squeezed by a big bear or something that just loves you unconditionally, and like give yourself that visualization and really feel into it. And when you have that level of acceptance for being in the fantasy and allowing yourself to be visceral with it, it means you've got every aspect of you really in that imagination center. The body truly heals because that is the place with least resistance. That is the place where your body goes, oh, look, we can have this right now. None of your circumstances have to change because the only thing that matters is your state of being. And what happens is if you heal yourself through that comfort of really giving yourself what you need in that moment, unique to you, your body will detach from all of the limitation and all the kind of chaos and overwhelm that's going on here, and it'll push it out. And now you've got more space in your aura to actually receive your next emotion, your next experience, your next choice that you're creating for yourself. But if you don't have the space, you can't receive the next step.
So what I'm really hearing you say, which I love this, you're not only just using your mind and imagination to say, okay, this is what, you're not even going to like what you want, because sometimes that's so stressful because I don't have it, you know. Instead, you're saying, make up some fun, crazy thing that just in your mind, like for me, I'm thinking of this huge teddy bear that's just holding me and it's all soft and squishy. So, you know, just imagining that warmth in my mind. So go crazy with it. You can be limitless with your imagination of what makes you feel good. And I don't think we were not taught to do this, for sure.
No, and it's the most profound way to heal your body because you're showing up completely, but you're also sort of getting out of your own way. You're not limiting it by any realistic, you know, trappings, like, because it doesn't have to be anything that you can see yourself actually experiencing. You know, it's like the visualization of being in the ocean with the dolphins. You know, it's like here you can breathe underwater. There's no limitation for your body. So you have to really let yourself figure out what actually is your true desire in that moment to get relief, because relief is the greatest love you can give yourself in that moment when you're feeling completely overwhelmed. You just need comfort. You can't even be focused on what your next step really is or what you want to create in your world until you deal with the coping aspect first.
That is so awesome. And actually that could be a regular practice, because sometimes even you know, setting your goal and imagining something happen, that can be very stressful in and of itself, instead of just being like, you know, just, I'm going to have a wonderful day at work, but let me first imagine being like cuddled with a big, huge teddy bear around me or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
You know, that just puts you in a completely different state of being.
Yes. And what you'll notice is that sometimes you're so kind of in a hypnosis state with that visualization, which is beautiful. That's where the body really uses this healer version of you in your fourth layer, the astral body, to really just start pulling things out of your space and healing you. And again, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. You don't have to know what you're releasing. You don't have to look at that energy and pick it apart. You just get to release and reset your energy. So it's like keeping it sort of simple is actually the most effective and the kindest thing you can do for yourself. And what's interesting is you might tune back into your body after it feels sort of complete and you notice you've been crying, maybe sobbing, and weren't even aware because you were so into the visual and releasing that the body is just using tears to release. Or maybe you got the hiccups, or maybe you have to pee really bad, or, you know, there's all these different ways that we express an energy healing, a clearing, and a release. And so really allowing yourself to just be with that and it's okay, whatever it is. Maybe you start wailing and making all kinds of vocal sounds, getting this energy out of your throat center. Like every time I show up to this and I coach people through it, it's like, there's nothing wrong. Everything is perfect the way it is. Just let yourself be visceral and kind of raw with the experience. And the more you're willing to do that, the more you really launch yourself into a different vibrational state of being. And what happens is your circumstances start to change around you. You can't expect yourself to create changes in your circumstance without changing your state of being.
You sound like Tony Robbins.
That's funny. Yeah, it's true.
Well, I mean, it's true. It's more, spiritual end of it. This is beautiful. Okay, so did we cover passion, excitement, and play? Are we covering all three realms of that?
So let's talk a little bit more about that. So when you look at your emotional attachments to things and just kind of what on the spectrum of emotions, first of all, having experience with the full spectrum is so important. In fact, I had this meditation a couple weeks ago now where my guides were making these silly, playful kind of comments about how to teach this. And because I was sort of going, I know it's true, but how do I put it into language? And they're like, okay, we'll start with this idea. Everyone's aware that physically we would love to have a deeper range of motion, right? Like we look at the neck and it's like, how much can we move? And we know that's important because it restricts the flow in your physical body, right? So we acknowledge that having range of motion is super important to develop in your physical body for ultimate wellness. But see, it's no different than looking at your second layer in your body, which is your emotional body. So in the same sort of concept, but restructured for the emotional body, that's saying you need to allow yourself to have the full range of emotion, because you cannot have the high bliss ecstasy experiences and emotional depth without also being willing to experience the low lows. And so really, it's the acknowledgement of the polarity system and how the more you can allow yourself to not be afraid of any of the emotions and just be willing to feel them and recognize that it's just your job to allow them to pass through you rather than identifying with them and getting kind of locked into this idea that, they're yours and you have to deal with it and it's stuck. And so really just becoming this visualization of your body being like a body of glass and just allowing that emotion to process through you and move through you, because sometimes the emotions you're feeling aren't even really connected to who you really are. They're connected more to a collective energy, something we're all purging out and processing. So if you were to take that energy and try to assign it to how it fits for you, you'd miss this opportunity to actually heal it completely. So if you can just see yourself as creating it as a more simple practice of let me just allow this to flow through me and feel into it, it will start to shift. So the willingness to feel it, the willingness to allow it to be okay actually changes the heaviness around the emotion and it lightens the load, because there's no longer the need for that vibration to keep occurring in that low density, because you're starting to give it a healing through the acceptance. And so it starts to rise into a higher vibration. And all of a sudden you have this general sense of relief of like, oh, I feel better. Like, oh, I'm not feeling the pain in my body. So when we look at that full spectrum, we acknowledge that on the high end, the easiest ones for us to like methodically tap into as a gauge for what is part of our purpose, what we are meant to engage with in order to co-create with our reality, I like to look at it as a few different emotions. So one of them is excitement. So what is the most exciting thing you could be doing right now? If there was no limitation, what would you do with your time? And who would you be? What would you look like? What would you be experiencing? How would you be feeling? Using excitement as the gateway for you to discover what your body's trying to communicate to you, because you're never wrong. Like if you're excited about jumping in the pool right this second, your body's trying to tell you, if that's the most exciting thing you can think of at this exact moment, then that's your body saying, this is what you need. This is going to help you reorient yourself to a higher frequency. And then maybe by simply following that excitement and acting on it, allowing yourself to just, spontaneously go jump in your pool, you might get out of the pool with this huge epiphany about something you've been trying to figure out. And so if you can bring yourself into alignment with acting on your highest excitement, all the time, you stay right in alignment with the highest possibility for your frequency.
Okay, so let me ask you a question with that, because I know that I've suffered with it, and I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are suffering with it in some sort. All of a sudden, there's great excitement to have that piece of carrot cake, and then that second piece of carrot cake, and then the third piece of carrot cake, or it could be for somebody else, a glass of wine, and the second glass of wine, third glass of wine, or getting on the internet and doing porn, or whatever it is. You know what I'm talking about. That's not excitement, but I want to just bring that up because I'm sure people are struggling with these kinds of things. And I wanted you to address that. What's the difference between an addictive behavior and true excitement that's going to awaken your soul?
Yeah, and a lot of it just kind of boils back down to temperance, like balance. And so it's not an issue for you to choose to experience too much carrot cake, because at the end you walk away with the acknowledgement that you overdid it. And so next time you're going to have that awareness when you're making the choice. Do I want to put this piece of cake in my mouth? It might make me feel worse, and I was really intending to make myself feel better. And so it brings you back to the choices. But it's okay for you to slip up and experience the less desirable outcome, because ultimately that brings your awareness into a higher state next time you have that choice up for debate.
Right, right. And so what would you say is that people get caught in that cycle over and over again, especially with what's happening now? A lot of people are home, and so they're in their cycles. Their addictions are right up in their face, whatever that may be for them. What would you say is a really key thing for people to get free from their addictive cycles?
Well, it goes back to recognizing that at first it's important to not be so hard on yourself when you realize you're in your addiction and you're doing these things. The first tendency you have is to hyper judge yourself and to really get hard on yourself. And now you're beating yourself up, and that just takes you 20 steps back, right? So being really aware of that initial reaction of, okay, I've made this mistake again. That's that pivotal in-between moment where you get to decide, what do you want to do now? What do you want to do with that reflection? Are you going to just simply make different choices, start a new routine? Are you going to simply validate yourself that you're just coping? Like you're in a state of need to console yourself, to really love yourself in a way that feels like a warm hug, you know? And when people need that, that's when they gravitate towards these addictions and these behaviors that they know are going to hurt them, because subconsciously that's what they believe that they deserve. So if you have the awareness of that's why you're doing it, then it frees up some space in your energy field to really say, well, maybe instead of doing any of those things, I'm going to go take a walk. I'm going to just go get out in nature. I'm going to think about what Libbee said earlier, and I'm going to actually create a change, a simple little change that's going to shake up my energy field. And then what happens through that process is you stop saying yes to the things that are hurting you, to those addictions. You start to it becomes easier to say no to them. It's not really like the carrot on the end of the stick just dangling there, like teasing you, but it takes time for you to prove to the body that you can make conscious change and conscious choices that feel really good. They feel like a reward. So when the body learns to value that over the escapism through the addictions and the coping, then the balance shifts. And then you don't even desire that. It's like when you're trying to give up sugar. The first thing that happens is you crave so much sugar. But once you get over that hurdle and someone says, hey, do you want some ice cream? It genuinely doesn't even sound good to you.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's not even hard for you to say, oh, no, thank you, because it's actually not a desire that you have anymore. So the only real thing you need to do when you realize that you're sort of stuck in the addiction cycle loop is start to make conscious choices of something that represents the opposite of that addiction. How can you take the energy behind the addiction and put it into something else that actually serves you, rather than just keep saying yes and then getting hard on yourself and expecting you to be able to change that when you're punishing yourself the whole time.
Right.
So you have to reward
the punishment
yourself.
part that you will get. Not punishing yourself anymore gets you out of that cycle.
Yes.
And replacing it also with something else. I think kind of like we're always going to be addicted. We're addicted to oxygen. We're addicted to electricity. You know, if you want to look at it from that point.
Addicted to coffee. Yeah.
And so It's really just changing the dial of what you're putting your focus on, or what you're putting your addiction energy towards. If you're addicted to doing yoga every day. That's way better than addicted to overeating every day. So, it's.
Yes, but still look at those addictions, because those can be sneaky, especially for
They
people
can.
advanced in the spiritual community. They don't even really recognize, because they put it in a category of this is something good, and so they don't realize that they're sort of attached and addicted to it. And so even in the things that you think are really serving you, it's important to constantly revisit that and question, am I overdoing this? Am I sort of addicted to this? Like, when I first started reading books, like I read thousands, like pretty much any metaphysical book I could get my hands on. I was addicted. I was addicted to the information and the knowledge. And yet at that time, it's like, I'm not addicted, I'm just passionate, so you can't really take ownership of it until you're ready. But once you're aware that that's what you're doing, then you start to bring balance. So just having your awareness, just that acceptance of, oh, I recognize that I might be addicted to this thing. I might be overdoing it slightly or using it as a crutch, let's say. What am I avoiding? Like, what if I don't do that? What energy is in me that I need to express in a different form? Maybe instead of doing the yoga that I'm addicted to every day, I'm actually going to get out a piece of paper and I'm going to finger paint, because I'm going to move that energy into something different. And now I've touched on changing my vibration. I've disconnected from the addiction cycle. And even if it's just in one day, you have this awareness, you've changed the addiction cycle by making a conscious choice. And now you've also gifted the body with that aha of you being able to show up and create change with your energy.
Being fluid, right?
Yeah. And so you give yourself like a radical healing just in that simple, experience.
Well, what came up while you're saying this, and this is going down a rabbit hole, but I just want to mention it anyway, is we're all addicted to breath.
Oh, yes.
And rightfully so, because it keeps us in our bodies. But with what's going on in the world right now, our attachment to being alive, if we can let go of that, really we're faced with not knowing what's going to happen. And they say people, there's going to be people that die and you're like, am I going to be one of them or not? And so it's really facing this is going a little bit too far down the rabbit hole, but really our addiction to breath, if you want to call it that, and just being able to be at peace with, if I die, then you've conquered fear.
Yes. Yes.
We're all headed there anyway in some point in time, but all of us try to not deal with it, and no one even talks about it.
Yes.
Conscious birthing, conscious dying is not something that even conscious relationships, conscious marriage. But if we could have more consciousness around the fact that we are here for such a temporary time, I think we would be more conscious and more kind and more aware and honor our relationships as sacred and honor every moment as sacred, and be less attached to the way things need to be right now, that kind of thing.
Well, and perhaps it resonates for most people that when you really dive into the fear of death and you really look at it, it's like, what are you really afraid of? I think the answer for most people, when you kind of peel back and whittle it down to one nutshell, it's the fear of not being in control. And it's interesting because when you look at it outside of the body from a spirit perspective, you're in total control when you leave the physical body. So it's the illusion of not having control that's actually the trigger of the fear of death, because death is really just a transition. It's just a dimensional shift. You still get to be you. In fact, you get to be you and this magnitude of all these other yous. And so there's more fear about living than there is of dying. And yet we live in a society that sort of programmed us and mind controlled us into believing that we should actually be afraid of death. But the truth is that we're afraid of living.